Imagine spending years in a small, dimly lit cell, waiting for the day the state decides to take your life. You know you're innocent. You've shouted it in courtrooms, written letters to journalists, and pleaded with judges, but no one believes you. The system is against you. The execution date arrives, and despite your final desperate attempts, justice does not come in time. You take your last breath, and years later, the truth emerges. But it's too late. This is not a hypothetical situation. This has happened. Innocent men and women have been executed by the justice system, only for their innocence to be proven long after their deaths. In this video, we'll uncover the horrifying reality of wrongful executions, the systemic failures that lead to these tragic mistakes, and the stories of those who were put to death for crimes they did not commit. The fallibility of the death penalty. Since 1973, more than 190 people in the United States have been exonerated after being sentenced to death. These individuals were proven innocent before their executions could take place. But what about those who weren't so lucky? For every 9 people executed, at least 1 has later been found innocent. This statistic alone raises a critical question. How many innocent lives have been unjustly taken before the truth surfaced? The death penalty is meant to be the ultimate punishment, reserved for the worst crimes. But it is not perfect. The justice system makes mistakes. Evidence is mishandled. Witnesses lie. Prosecutors seek convictions instead of truth. And once an execution takes place, there is no undoing it. Case 1. Carlos DeLuna, executed for another man's crime. Carlos DeLuna was 27 years old when he was executed in Texas in 1989 for the murder of Wanda Lopez, a gas station clerk who was stabbed to death in Corpus Christi in 1983. The case against him relied heavily on the testimony of a single eyewitness, who claimed to have seen DeLuna at the scene of the crime. There was no physical evidence linking him to the murder. No DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon. He was convicted and sentenced to death. However, DeLuna had always maintained that he was innocent and that the real killer was a man named Carlos Hernandez. Hernandez was a known violent offender with a history of knife attacks, and he had repeatedly confessed to killing Lopez. Yet at the time of the trial, authorities dismissed Hernandez as a phantom, a fictional character invented by DeLuna to escape conviction. Years after DeLuna's execution, investigative reports uncovered undeniable evidence that Hernandez was not only real, but had openly admitted to committing the crime. The legal system had executed the wrong man. Case 2. Cameron Todd Willingham, executed over junk science. Cameron Todd Willingham was sentenced to death for allegedly setting a fire that killed his 3 young daughters in 1991. Prosecutors claimed that evidence at the scene indicated arson and that Willingham had deliberately started the fire. The case was built on forensic science that was later completely debunked. Experts re-examined the fire scene and determined that there was no evidence of arson. It was an accidental fire, not a crime. Despite this, Texas executed Willingham in 2004. Years later, leading fire investigators confirmed that the state had used faulty fire analysis in court. The scientific evidence that sealed his fate was completely false. Willingham died an innocent man. Case 3. Troy Davis, a case that sparked worldwide protests. Troy Davis was convicted in 1991 for the murder of off-duty police officer Mark McPhail in Savannah, Georgia. The prosecution's case relied heavily on eyewitness testimonies, 7 of whom later recanted, citing police coercion and intimidation. Despite the lack of physical evidence linking Davis to the crime and widespread international appeals for clemency, he was executed in 2011. His case remains one of the most controversial executions in modern history. Case 4. George Stinney Jr., the youngest person executed in the U.S. George Stinney Jr. was only 14 years old when he was executed in 1944 in South Carolina, making him the youngest person executed in modern U.S. history. He was convicted of the murders of two white girls, Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames, solely based on a coerced confession obtained after hours of interrogation without his parents or a lawyer present. Stinney's trial lasted only 2 hours, and he was convicted by an all-white jury. His defense lawyer called no witnesses, failed to present any evidence, and made no effort to challenge the prosecution. He was executed in the electric chair just 81 days after his arrest. Decades later, in 2014, a judge overturned his conviction, ruling that Stinney had been denied due process and that his trial had been a miscarriage of justice. While his name was cleared, justice came 70 years too late. Case 5. Larry Griffin, a conviction built on a faulty witness. Larry Griffin was executed in 1995 in Missouri for a drive-by shooting in 1980. The case against him relied primarily on the testimony of one supposed eyewitness, who later admitted that he had lied under police pressure. No forensic evidence tied Griffin to the crime, and new evidence suggested that the actual perpetrators had never been pursued. Years after Griffin's execution, an investigation led by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund found major inconsistencies in the prosecution's case, including the fact that Griffin had an alibi and that the state had ignored testimony from key witnesses who could have exonerated him. His case remains one of the most widely criticized wrongful executions in U.S. history. Case 6. Claude Jones, executed over misinterpreted evidence. Claude Jones was executed in Texas in 2000 for the murder of a liquor store owner. The conviction was largely based on a single strand of hair found at the crime scene, which forensic experts at the time claimed matched Jones. A decade after his execution, advancements in DNA testing proved that the hair did not belong to Jones, meaning the key evidence used against him was false. If modern forensic technology had been applied at the time of his trial, Jones might have been exonerated and spared from execution. Case 7. Johnny Garrett, a troubled teenager, executed without proper evidence. Johnny Garrett was only 17 years old when he was convicted and later executed in Texas in 1992 for the rape and murder of a nun. The case against him was built on flimsy forensic evidence, with no direct physical proof linking him to the crime scene. Garrett had a documented history of severe mental illness and trauma, but his attorneys failed to present this crucial evidence in court. Years later, DNA evidence suggested that another man had likely committed the crime, but the state of Texas proceeded with Garrett's execution regardless. His case has since been cited as one of the most tragic miscarriages of justice in death penalty history. Case 8. Leo Jones, police misconduct and coerced confessions. Leo Jones was convicted and sentenced to death in Florida for the 1979 killing of a police officer. His conviction was based almost entirely on a coerced confession obtained after hours of violent interrogation by police. Jones maintained his innocence throughout his trial, and over the years, multiple officers who were involved in the case later admitted that the confession was forced. Despite this, Jones was executed in 1998. His case remains a disturbing example of how police misconduct can lead to wrongful executions. Case 9. Sedley Alley, denied DNA testing that could have saved him. Sedley Alley was executed in 2006 for the rape and murder of a U.S. Marine in Tennessee. Throughout his trial and incarceration, he pleaded for DNA testing to prove his innocence, but the courts denied his request. Years after his execution, modern DNA testing on previously untested evidence suggested that another individual had committed the crime. If Alley had been granted access to this testing before his execution, he might have been proven innocent and spared from death. The systemic flaws that lead to wrongful executions. The cases we've explored are not isolated incidents. They are part of a larger pattern of systemic failures in the justice system that continue to lead to the wrongful execution of innocent people. Here are some of the biggest issues that contribute to this problem. Lack of proper legal representation. Many death row inmates rely on overworked public defenders who don't have the resources to mount a proper defense. Use of flawed forensic science, outdated forensic techniques, such as bite mark analysis and hair comparisons, have led to wrongful convictions. Coerced confessions. Many defendants, especially those who are young or mentally impaired, are forced into confessing to crimes they didn't commit. Police and prosecutorial misconduct. Some cases involve hidden evidence, false testimony, or biased law enforcement tactics that lead to wrongful convictions. Denial of DNA testing. Some states refuse to allow DNA testing, even when it could prove a person's innocence before their execution. So, can we continue to justify the death penalty? With so many proven cases of wrongful executions, we must ask ourselves, can we continue to support a system that kills innocent people? If even one innocent person is executed, the system is fundamentally broken. And as we have seen, the number of wrongful executions is not just one, it's far too many. The justice system is not perfect, and as long as mistakes are possible, can we really afford to keep the death penalty? The cost of getting it wrong is a human life that can never be brought back. What do you think? Should the death penalty be abolished, or do you think it should remain in place? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the world of crime and justice. Thanks for watching.